Okay then, so character profile time then. Gail was going to get married this week. It didn't work out. It was going to be her 5th husband, I think.
Remember.
But we're looking at the classic character profile this week of husband number 1, Brian Tilsley.
You're my husband number 1.
Out of 5.
Well, we don't know yet.
So I mean, I've watched old classic episodes with Brian in, and I wasn't particularly that interested by him. I think.
This is going to be a great character profile.
I think Gail's husbands have got gradually more interesting. Well, actually, no, Joe McIntyre wasn't interesting at all.
You just really like what's his face.
I do really like Michael, and I think. I mean, I can say a little bit later about my favourite of her husbands, but I think she's really well suited to Michael. And with Brian, I don't know because I mean I wasn't watching it at the time, but from doing all this research for the character profile and everything, I think she was better off away from him because he wasn't that nice to her, to be honest. He wasn't a wrong un, but he treated her pretty badly, as we shall see. So Brian, he was born on the 15th of October 1958 and died on the 15th of February 1989.
Spoiler.
Yes, that's right, he is dead. His parents were Bert and Ivy Tilsley, sticking on the religious theme there for the episode. And he married Gail in 1979 and then again in 1988. He had 2 children. 2 of the Platts are theirs. Nick, his dad was Brian, and Nick never really mentions his dad or thinks about his dad or wonders about his dad on screen particularly. And the lovely Sarah Louise was Brian's as well. She was born in 1987. So that's out of the 3 Platt children, 2 of them were his.
Well, Nick is Nick Tilsley anyway.
Yeah, well that was a huge matter of which surname he should keep and everything. So Brian first appeared at Christmas, 27th of December 1978, and he last appeared, of course, on the night that he died, the 15th of February 1989. He was in 525 episodes of Coronation Street, which makes him, I think I'm right in saying, the 85th most featured character, but it was pretty close between him and Todd and Owen, and I think just this past week, or maybe the week before, Todd and Owen might have overtaken him in the rankings.
See, once you're out the show, you can't improve your rankings.
No, absolutely not, especially if you killed off.
Yeah.
He was played by Christopher Quinten. Now, Quinten had been a dancer in the West End before being in Coronation Street, and I don't think he danced with, but he'd been a support dancer for the likes of Cilla Black and Jimmy Tarbuck. So he'd been with some of the big names of yesteryear. He had a couple of small TV parts in the late 1970s, and then Coronation Street came along.
Hooray!
And they wanted somebody to be a love interest for Gail. And when did Gail start in it? That must have been in the mid-70s. So she'd been in it for a little bit, and then Brian came along. So 1978, he was first seen at a New Year's party with his mate Tim Gibbs. And Brian was very drunk.
Was he a pirate?
What, Gibbs?
Tim Gibbs sounds like a pirate's name.
I don't think so. But he saw Gail and asked her out to the cinema, but he was so drunk that he stood her up the next day. And this is in 1979 now. But she agreed to see him again anyway. Now, Brian's mum was incredibly Catholic, Ivy Tilsley.
I think there's definitely degrees of Catholic.
Yes, she was very devout Catholic, and
she was almost Pope-like.
Ivy would not have accepted Billy, I would say.
Yes.
But can you have gay clergy in the Catholic Church, or is it just Church of England? I don't think so. No, but she wasn't even happy with Gail and Brian together because Gail was not a Catholic girl. But that didn't stop them because they got married that November, so it didn't take them very long.
Who cares what they say?
Well, I suppose Ivy would have preferred if they were going to get married, then they get married quickly. But they moved in with his mum and dad so they could save a bit of money up.
I don't think it'd be worth the savings. In 1980, he was not happy with the long hours that Gail was working in the cafe, or the fact that she was imposing spending restrictions on him. So Ivy loaned them £300 to put a deposit on a new house, which was in Willow Crescent. But it turned out that she had taken this money from her and Bert's holiday fund, so Brian says that they should really return it because it's too sad otherwise. So they end up getting a smaller place, and then they get ready for the birth of their first child, Nikki, who was born on New Year's Eve.
Nicky, now known as Nick.
It reminds me of Little Nicky, the Adam Sandler film.
No, I've not seen that. Yes, Nick used to be Nicky. It'd be so funny. Can you imagine him being called Nicky now?
Nicky now. Nicky Knocky now.
The bistro would be called just Nicky's or Nicky's Bistro. It sounds like a kid's restaurant.
It does a bit.
So the married life of Brian and Gail really seemed to be characterised by having no money and arguing a lot. So
Oh, it sounds like us.
yeah. So Brian started to get fed up with married
I
life
could just kill you off.
in 1981. No, that's not what happened. Gail did not get killed off. But as soon as he
got killed off.
Oh, he
me
did?
Get killed off.
Oh,
Stupid.
yeah.
I'm the main character.
As soon as he got a chance to get away in 1982, he did. He got asked to work in the Middle East for a bit, and he was like, "Yeah, that's fine."
Okay.
So he went off, and Gail had to then cope on her own for a bit. And even when he got a chance to come home on leave, he went over to Egypt instead, which obviously upset Gail. So she agreed to go on a date with lorry driver Lee Charlton while he was away. So she was a bit of a loose woman back then.
That's all
But he came back in July, beat up Les, and used all the money that he'd earned over in Qatar to buy the garage in Albert Street. And because he was such a hunk later that year, Sharon Gaskell developed a crush on him, and she was Rita's first foster daughter before Jenny came
Original
along.
and best, Jenny.
Yeah. He had to get harsh with her because she became completely obsessed with him, and that made Brian and Len fall out as well, because Len was saying that Brian had led her on, but to be fair to him, he had not. I think it was all from Sharon.
I mean, it really is. He was a catch, so what is he supposed
Sharon
to
was
do?
just 17 back at the time, so it was a young infatuation she had with his golden locks.
Oh, lovely. Run your hands through that. In 1983, Gail's own mate Susie Birchall turned up, and she tries to seduce Brian as well, because she was sick of Gail crowing about
80s
having
mullet, I tell you.
the perfect family. Brian turns her down, and she's giving her marching orders by Elsie Tanner.
Yeah, I think Susie Birchall, who'd been Gail's old friend, came back just for a little bit, a year, and this was her exit storyline when Elsie kicked her out for trying to split up the perfect relationship between Brian and Gail. So he bought the rest of the garage later that year, and he had his dad Bert coming to work for him at the he came to work with him at the garage because Bert had a little stroke and lost his job. So Brian was like, well, come and work with me. Shouldn't have really done that, because while Bert was working at the garage, he got injured by an exploding tyre. He then suffered depression and was hospitalised. And also that year, he took on Kevin as an apprentice. So this is where Kevin's long life, big break came, thanks to Brian. So early, like the first few weeks, I think, of 1984, Bert died in hospital. And so Brian and Gail then had to move back in with Ivy to support her. But he was really, really overprotective of her. He was a total mummy's boy, and I think, given the choice, he would pick his mum over Gail most of the time.
Sin.
I know. So he then started hanging around with some new rich yuppie friends that year, because he took up squash, and he suggested to Gail that they went and spent 2 weeks sunning themselves in Spain and living the high life, and Gail was not very comfortable with the whole thing. She's a simple girl with simple tastes.
Oh, don't go to Spain, it's too fancy for me.
Exactly, so they decided to call the whole thing off.
I've never been to Spain. Have I?
What? You've never been to Spain?
I don't think I
don't
have.
know. It's not that great.
I can speak Spanish though.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can.
I've been to Spain a few times.
Hola.
Yeah, there we go. Spain, I'm sure Spain is lovely for any Spanish listeners.
I haven't been.
I prefer France. 1985, married life with Gail was still very, very difficult. He made matters worse by spending his savings on the garage rather than a house deposit for them. So Gail was fed up, moved away to a bedsit with Nicky, and Brian was like, "Well, you go away. I'm not going to chase after you. I'm the man. If you have your womanly strops." So then he started acting as if he was single, and he thought that because he was such a mummy's boy that Ivy would be completely on his side, but actually she threw him out, so he had to grovel to Gail, and he then promised to find her a house. So they got a council house.
When you're saying the garage, you mean the business, don't you?
Yes, I do mean that.
Not just a random garage. It makes it sound like he's pimping out his garage and spending all his money on like Jodie Foster posters or something. In 1986, while Brian was away on business, Gail had an affair with his Australian cousin Ian.
I can't believe how flirty and everything Gail was back then, because you see her as like the traditional kind of family woman who's like all morally upstanding and everything these days.
You have a wild childhood, haven't you? I mean, a wild youth or whatever. Yeah. She becomes pregnant, but she doesn't know who the father is. And then Brian says, I will forgive you as long as you have an abortion, which is so understandable and exactly what we'd like to see in your husband. And she refuses, so he starts divorce proceedings against her before starting to date businesswoman Liz Turnbull.
Well, the baby came in 1987 and it was Sarah Louise. She was born 4 months early.
That is very early
because
for 1987.
I know. And Brian attacked Ian because they didn't know who the dad was. Brian had just found out about all this that had happened.
Another Platt Who's the Daddy storyline.
It was. So Ian got a blood test done to prove the baby wasn't his at all. But still, Brian refused to accept Sarah Lou as being his for a little while. He then went off on a bit of a mad spree. He kidnapped Nicky, whatever you want to call him.
Nicky is good.
Wanted to sell the garage, move over to Ireland, but
Can you really sell the garage while you are kidnapping a small child? Does it not add a bit of baggage to the financial transaction that you wouldn't really want?
I'm sure that you can find more details about that should you wish to on the internet.
Yeah.
So Gail found out where he was anyway. I think she intercepted him en route at a service station or something, begged for him to return their son back. So he was like, yeah, okay. And Gail, please take me back. She did, but by then the marriage was already pretty much over. They got back together, but it was for the sake of the children. In 1980,
never do that. Look what happened to Charles and Diana.
Yeah, so they were married. They were married again. But 1988, Brian was basically spending most of the nights away from home. He was chatting up girls.
Like
it was
Charles.
Again living as if he was living the single life, basically.
Well, Gail gets fed up with this in 1989 and she asks for a divorce. And he says, well, then I'm going to fight for custody of Nicky, my favourite child.
But before he got the chance, and I think it was the very night he decided he was going to fight for custody of Nicky and she asked for a divorce, he went off clubbing again and then got involved in a bit of a brawl where a woman needed defending from a ruffian there.
Ooh,
Brian,
ruffians.
the chivalrous chap that he is, and he probably thought that he might be getting lucky with this woman, tried to defend her, but he got stabbed and died. So a shocking, violent death for Brian.
But the most important thing is, what happened to the woman? Did she get away all right?
I think she was probably fine.
Do you think?
I
Maybe
think
she
so.
was traumatised for the rest of her life.
I don't know. Brian's death is one that they often show on clip shows. I think that was quite. That was an example of quite an early violent one.
I'm making it up.
You're probably not. I'm sure you've seen it lots of times. So that was the sad end of Brian Tilsley.
Not that Nick cares.
No, exactly. Christopher Quinten had decided he wanted to emigrate to the United States because he had some.
Because his long lost mother Linda came and offered him a.
He had a fiance over there. He had originally said, "Well, look, I know that I'm quite a main character in the street, so can I just stay part-time and still be part of the show?" And the producers are like, no, we're going to kill you off instead. So
Vicious.
He went off to the United States and he was in RoboCop 2. Now, often when we say about what happened to people who leave Coronation Street, it's like they're in this nice little detective drama or they went on stage or
like
something.
This medical drama.
Exactly.
Or a period drama.
He went on and he starred in RoboCop 2, which I suppose was a big film of the 80s.
The most successful
it's a film that I've heard of.
Ex-Corrie cast member of all time, in my opinion.
They don't all go to Hollywood, do they?
No, he came back to Britain, though, because he ended up getting a divorce. And he had just a few small television appearances since then, but he's done lots of pantos, which we all just love, don't we?
Yeah. So, I wonder how different Coronation Street would have been had Brian not been killed, because Gail's life just seems to be a string of going from man to man, doesn't it? And I think I couldn't imagine her staying with him together. I mean, they don't really like to keep couples together in Coronation Street anyway.
No, very untraditional views of marriage.
Yeah,
No wonder Emily's so irate all the time.
Yeah, I think a change is as good as a rest for Gail. It would have been interesting for Sarah Lou and Nick to have had their dad around, but
Interesting.
Well, having a proper father figure. I think when Sarah Lou grew up, she kind of thought of Martin being her dad anyway, even though
all the other people
really
would be
wasn't.
like, what's it like to have your parents be your real parents and not your secret long lost sisters, brothers, aunties pretending to be your dad?
Yeah.
Or your dad, you call your dad, but actually he's your, brother.
But anyway,
Anyway,
let us move
whittled
on. Yeah, so that's Brian. We haven't got a huge amount to say for him, but if you were interested in the first Gail husbandship, now you know.
Gail husband ship.
Now you know what happened,
The mothership.
roughly.